I'm Dom Nicholls, and this is Ukraine the latest. Today, as Ukraine fires hundreds of drones into Russia, closing all of Moscow's major airports, we report how the maritime war is hotting up, with Kyiv targeting Shadow Fleet tankers in the Black Sea and oil rigs in the Caspian Sea. Meanwhile, there's been more testy diplomacy, with Donald Trump saying he'd exchanged pretty strong words with his European counterparts, just as reports emerge of the White House plan to bring Russia's economy in from the cold. And later, we hear how the governing body of world chess is trying to get Russian teams back into world competition.
Bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory.
Russia does not want peace.
Erstens, wir verteidigen mit unserer Hilfe für die Ukraine auch unsere Freiheit und unsere europäischen Werte.
If I'm president, I will have that war settled in one day, 24 hours.
We are with you, not just today or tomorrow, but for 100 years.
Nous ne pouvons pas, comme Européens, laisser gagner la Russie en Ukraine.
Nobody's going to break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians.
It's Thursday, the 11th of December, 3 years and 292 days since the full-scale invasion began. And today I'm joined by the Telegraph's executive editor for audio, Francis Dearnley, and our chess correspondent, Malcolm Pein. I started with the news of Ukraine's latest attack on Moscow. Moscow came under prolonged drone attack last night. Moscow's mayor Sergei Sobyanin said that Russian air defense units had shot down at least 31 drones heading for the capital. Explosions were reported in the suburbs, according to Russian Telegraph news channel Shot, and emergency crews were said to be still working, clearing debris from the crash sites. No casualties or damage reported as yet. Russia's Federal Air Transport Agency, Rosaviatsia, said Moscow's Vnukovo, Domodedovo, Sheremetyevo and Zhukovsky airports were temporarily closed. That was part of a wider attack across the country last night that saw nearly 300 Ukrainian drones fired, reported by the Kremlin. The governor of Novgorod, that's just south of St. Petersburg in the northwest of Russia, said 19 drones were shot down there. There were no official reports of damage, but images on social media show something on fire, possibly the Akron fertilizer plant. Local outlets said that the PJSC Akron, that's one of Russia's largest chemical production facilities, came under attack last night. Residents reportedly heard multiple explosions across the city. The governor, Alexander Dronov, said all operational services are on high alert. Please remain calm. I am keeping the situation under personal control. No Christmas bonus for Alexander. Now, elsewhere, President Zelensky has proposed an energy truce with Russia, suggesting that Ukraine would halt its strikes against Russian energy infrastructure if Russia reciprocated. He was speaking on Tuesday. The Kremlin, however, responded yesterday, funnily enough, rejecting that idea. It shows, I think, that they see the real danger for them in it. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said Russia is, quote, working towards peace, not a ceasefire. Okay. Then Kirill Dmitriev, who's Putin's chief negotiator, accused President Zelensky, the United Kingdom and the European Union of attempting to trick Russia into a temporary ceasefire. And just to follow up, Russian State Duma International Affairs Committee First Deputy Head Alexei Chepa falsely accused Ukraine of violating a prior US-brokered energy infrastructure ceasefire in March of this year. You'll remember Ukraine and Russia never agreed to any formal terms for that energy ceasefire, which Russia unilaterally claimed began on March the 18th. The US-based think tank Institute for the Study of War said at the time that the Kremlin was trying to exploit the temporary energy infrastructure ceasefire's vague and unfinalized terms in order to accuse Ukraine of violating the agreements. Now, sticking with the ISW, and they're assessing today that Russian forces have not yet seized Pokrovsk. They say the situation, however, remains very difficult in that area. Their continued assessment is that Russian forces will very likely seize Pokrovsk and Minarat, about 5 km to the east, but will take much more time and suffer many more casualties in doing so. Geolocated footage published on Tuesday shows Ukrainian forces still active in northwestern Pokrovsk and northwestern Minarat, having either maintained or recently recaptured those positions. A spokesperson of a Ukrainian brigade operating in the area there said that Russian forces are simultaneously assaulting Minarat and the flanks and are cutting off or attempting to cut off Ukrainian logistics and resupplies. Russia is trying to combine airstrikes and ground operations. It's not hugely coordinated and therefore not particularly successful yet, but does show that they are trying to do more than just the meat assaults / infiltration tactics. There is some reported use by Russia of armoured vehicles again. Elements of the Russian 76th Airborne Division, the VDV division, reportedly took advantage of poor weather conditions recently to conduct a mechanised assault from south to north Pokrovsk. And geolocated footage published yesterday shows Russian forces in about platoon size conducting a mechanised assault in the west of the city. All indicates that Russian forces have been able to transport at least some vehicles in without being hit by drones. As we reported yesterday, General Alexander Syrsky, the head of Ukraine's armed forces, said that Ukrainian troops still operate in northern Pokrovsk, but he did acknowledge that there had been no Ukrainian forces in the city on a recent unspecified date, which suggests that Ukrainian forces have either recently retaken limited positions within the town, but also at some point evacuated it. He also said that Ukrainian forces had withdrawn from the Sukyar, Lysivka and Novopavlivka areas, that's to the south and southeast of Pokrovsk. Now that activity may account for the surge in yesterday's reported Russian casualty figures, as reported by Ukraine's General Staff, which, as I say, has been taken over the last few years to be reasonably accurate. They report 1,460 Russian casualties yesterday, a casualty being dead, wounded, missing or taken prisoner. That was for no discernible gain in territory, as far as I could see up and down the line. In Ukraine, 83 of 152 drones were shot down, as were 2 of 3 Kinzhal hypersonic missiles yesterday. The Ukrainian city of Kremenchuk in Poltava Oblast, that's about 250 southeast of Kyiv, that was particularly badly hit. The Oblast Governor Vladimir Kohut said this morning a significant number of targets were shot down, but falling debris and direct hits on the facilities caused fires. The facilities he's referencing there were energy infrastructure. No casualties reported, however. Ukraine's Air Force said Russia had launched waves of drones at Kremenchuk and its thought ballistic missiles as well. Now into the Black Sea, and there's very dramatic footage online that you'll be able to find. In fact, we've got it on our website as well, showing Ukraine's security service, the SBU, and the Ukrainian Navy hitting an oil tanker called Dashan with Sea Baby drones. Severely damages the tanker, forces it to cease operations, we're told. Ukrainian intelligence sources said that the Dashan oil tanker was heading towards Novorossiysk on the Russia's Black Sea coast in Krasnodar Krai, flying the Comoro Islands flag. They said it carried about $600 million worth of petrol products at the time of the strike. I've no idea if that's a lot, but she is sitting quite high in the water, so is not full at the time of the strike. The videos that you'll see show very large blasts at the rear of the ship. I don't know if they're going for the propulsion mechanism, the rudder, what have you, but it's a good way of disabling the ship. Now, linked to that, Ukraine has stopped the operation of a Russian oil platform in the Caspian Sea for the first time. Ukraine's security service, again, the SBU, has taken credit after at least 4 maritime drones hit Lukoil's Filinovsky platform in the northern part of the Caspian Sea. Production from about 20 wells has been stopped. Interesting that they use maritime drones. The Caspian Sea is, well, it's landlocked. So how did Ukraine get the drones there? I would wonder. It's said to be one of the largest exploration sites in Russia, owned by a subsidiary of the oil giant Lukoil. Now, yesterday, you'll remember we spoke of the US 2026 National Defense Authorization Act. For more details on that, do have a listen back to yesterday. Just to say that did pass the House yesterday. It was voted through. It now advances to the Senate. It includes provisions for Ukraine and the continued Baltic Sea Initiative. In many ways, it is seen as a possible counter to the national security strategy that came out last Friday. Certainly it talks of, or through its actions of apportioning money, it does go counter to some of the themes that might be running through the national security strategy. It'll be interesting to see where it goes from here. And just finally for me, I'd missed this a couple of days ago, but I caught up with it today. The Foreign Secretary here in the UK, Yvette Cooper, gave the Locarno centenary speech a couple of days ago. Now, Locarno Pact was 1925. It was signed between Britain, France, Belgium, Italy and Germany, supposed to protect borders and improve relationships. Now, clearly didn't work brilliantly because the Second World War broke out, but it still exists and it's been revised and seen as a mechanism to keep those good relationships going. Now, interestingly, so Yvette Cooper delivered the speech during which she said she was going to sanction the Russian media outlet Rybar. She says it's a Telegram channel network of affiliates in 28 languages that reaches millions worldwide. But she said using classic Kremlin manipulation tactics, it includes fake investigations and AI-driven content to shape narratives about global events in the Kremlin's favour. She said masquerading as an independent body, Rybar is in fact partially coordinated by the presidential administration, receiving funding from Russian state corporation Rostec and working with members of the Russian intelligence services. She says we have also sanctioned Pravfond, attributed by Estonia as a front for the GRU, Russian military intelligence. She said leaked reports suggest that Pravfond finances the promotion of Kremlin narratives to Western audiences, as well as bankrolling legal defences for convicted Russian assassins and arms traffickers. Yvette Cooper said our new measures will also hit Moscow-based think tank, the Centre for Geopolitical Expertise, and its founder, Alexander Dugin, whose work closely informs Putin's calculations. She said an organisation whose senior leaders are involved in Storm 1516, a malign influence network which produces content designed to create support for Russia's illegal war in Ukraine. So interesting note there from the Foreign Secretary. It'll be interesting to see what happens to Rybar, how they respond and how the Kremlin responds. That's us updated on the military front. Francis, yet more diplomatic shenanigans. What have you been looking at?
Absolutely. Shenanigans is one word for it, Dom. Thanks very much and welcome back, Malcolm. Great to be with you. European leaders warned of a critical moment for relations with the US yesterday after more crunch talks on peace. Britain's Keir Starmer, France's Emmanuel Macron and Germany's Friedrich Merz all called President Trump in an attempt to make progress, stressing the importance for shared security across the Euro-Atlantic region. The initial reaction from Trump, surprise, surprise, wasn't encouraging, though, admitting he exchanged pretty strong words with his European counterparts and expressed reluctance to meet with them and President Zelensky unless there was a serious prospect of peace. Here were his exact words. The leaders of France, we spoke to Germany and UK, all very good leaders, very good friends of mine, and we discussed Ukraine in pretty strong words, and we'll see what happens. I mean, we're talking and waiting to hear answers before we progress. I think we have had some little disputes about people, and we're going to see how it turns out. They would like us to go to a meeting over the weekend in Europe, and we'll make a determination depending on what they come back with. We don't want to be wasting time. Now, that rather crass reference to little disputes about people could mean any number of things, but one assumes it relates to the Donbass region, and more on that in a moment. Meanwhile, Zelensky held a virtual meeting with Scott Bessent, the US Treasury Secretary, Jared Kushner, Mr. Trump's son-in-law, of course, and Larry Fink, the chief executive of BlackRock, the world's biggest asset manager, in a call focused on the US proposals for the economic development and post-war reconstruction. That marks a practical follow-up to the news that there are 3 core documents and work streams shaping the current negotiation track: the Framework Peace Agreement, security guarantees, and the reconstruction plan. So this was the working group for the last one, and perhaps in some ways the easiest one and the least complex one. The Wall Street Journal has further info on this, saying that the Trump administration has handed its European counterparts a series of documents, each a single page, laying out its vision for the reconstruction of Ukraine and the return of Russia to the global economy. The outcome stands to profoundly alter the economic map of the continent, detailing plans for US financial firms and other businesses to tap roughly $200 billion frozen Russian assets for projects in Ukraine and beyond, including a massive new data center to be powered by the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, currently occupied by Russian troops. Another appendix, says the Journal, offers America's broad strokes vision for bringing Russia's economy in from the cold, with US companies investing in strategic sectors from rare earth extraction to drilling for oil in the Arctic, and helping to restore Russian energy flows to Western Europe and the rest of the world. Some European officials who have seen the documents said they weren't sure whether to take some of the proposals seriously. One official compared them to Trump's vision of building a Riviera-style development in Gaza. Another, referring to the proposed US-Russia energy deals, said it was an economic version of the 1945 conference where World War II victors divvied up Europe. It's like Yalta, he said. It follows that very significant report in the Journal last week that showed how American companies with close links to the White House were positioning themselves to profit from the peace plan. And there are other rumours circulating around at the moment about what exactly the US peace proposals include compared to the original. There's talk of a demilitarised zone from Donetsk to Kherson, Ukraine joining the EU by 2027, and the US offering NATO-style security guarantees. But I stress, those are rumours, and each one of those, as you'll know, is hugely controversial and complex. And yet, I'm going to stick my neck out here. The pressure being as it is on Ukraine, both militarily and politically, internationally and domestically, it's beginning to feel like some kind of endgame, to borrow a chess analogy, might well be approaching. The sheer number of calls and meetings between world leaders is so unprecedented and the scale of the rhetoric so intense, it's hard to see all of this political bandwidth being spent for no outcome, especially when there seems to be no decisive shift in policy from Europe. But as Malcolm can attest, endgames can sometimes take a very long time indeed, and it is worth reflecting the kind of shape they might be taking. Kyiv clearly feels it cannot legally sacrifice the Donbass, as losing it would delegitimise their cause. But the key to Ukraine's survival is, of course, security guarantees, its political sovereignty, and its economic viability, which are anchored most predominantly in the west, north, and south of the country. Might that mean they find some kind of compromise in which Russia gets large parts or all of the Donbass, not legally, but de facto, whilst acquiring all of those other things? I'm certainly not saying that's on the table, but it is a relevant question given the immense pressure that Ukrainian people face. And when there are no good options, what is the least bad option? Perhaps fighting on is the answer to that, by the way. And bear in mind, this assumes Russia would just accept the Donbass, and there's so much evidence that they won't. As we heard from James Kilner on Monday, the Russian propaganda machine is not talking up the prospects of a peace deal. And only today, the BBC's Steve Rosenberg cites a piece in the Russian press saying, "We will not agree to a truce because we need the capitulation of Ukraine." Another factor worth considering here too is whether the Europeans calculate that the longer the war goes on, the worse their hand, not just Ukraine's, becomes. The publication of the unclassified US national security strategy certainly gives some ammunition to those anxieties. I remember us asking on the pod several times over the past few months whether the West really exists anymore, and it seems that that hypothetical question has now bled into reality already. Here's what Merz said this week. What we once called the normative West no longer exists in this form. At best, it's still a geographical designation, but no longer a normative bond that holds us together. Notably, in Denmark, conversations have been reignited about acquiring their own independent nuclear deterrent. The world is shifting at an unprecedented pace, and there is a real risk Ukraine will be miscast as a cause of a declining Europe, or at least deprioritised. I still believe, of course, Ukraine is absolutely pivotal to the future security of Europe and the future security and prosperity of the entire world. But there may be others who prefer to look inwards, carving out different blocks of security within Europe and the wider world and prioritising those instead. And by the way, that is the priority now of the US too. Defense One report that while the publicly released national security strategy of the US called for the end of a perpetually expanding NATO, the full version goes into far more detail of how the Trump administration would like to make Europe great again. It works from the premise that Europe is facing a civilizational erasure because of its immigration policies and censorship of free speech. And the strategy, apparently, in its classified form, proposes to focus US relationships with European countries on a few nations with like-minded current administrations and movements. Austria, Hungary, Italy, and Poland are listed as countries that the US should, quote, work more with, the goal of pulling them away from the European Union. And we should support parties, movements and intellectual and cultural figures, the strategy says, who seek sovereignty and preservation and restoration of traditional European ways of life, while remaining pro-American. It's a sign of just how far the US has shifted from the Cold War era. And just to emphasise that point, I've pulled out some quotes from the US national security strategy of the Reagan administration and just listen to these commitments and contrast them with today. A commitment to the goals of world freedom, peace and prosperity, strong and close relationships with our alliance partners around the world, active assistance to those who are struggling for their own self-determination, freedom and a reasonable standard of living and development. Willingness to be realistic about the Soviet Union, but to define publicly the crucial moral distinctions between totalitarianism and democracy. It also says this: while the United States has been the leader of the free world since the end of the Second World War, we have not acted alone. During that war and in the succeeding 4 decades, our strategy has been based on partnership with those nations that share our common goals. As the world has changed over the years, the differences between nations striving to develop democratic institutions and those following the totalitarian banner have come into sharp focus. As future changes take place in human rights, advanced technology, quality of life and the global economy, our example will continue to exert tremendous influence on mankind. The United States is on the right side of the historic struggle, and we have tried to build a lasting framework for promoting this positive change. The stark truth now is this: on the 250th anniversary of its revolution, a revolution that ignited freedom movements across continents, America's current leaders no longer hold fast to the principles proclaimed in 1775 and defended with immeasurable sacrifice and hardship from 1941 to 45 and beyond. What was once assumed to be a given is now up for debate, and that changes everything, as it means the whole world is having to recalibrate. The question is, are we in Europe, in Canada, in Australia, in New Zealand, in Japan, in Taiwan, to list just a few, ready to face this new reality and the price therein? The tragedy and enduring suffering of Ukraine suggests only one answer right now. But we've got to hope things are going to change soon. But that's where we are, Dom, in the political realm. So, sorry, a rather morbid end to the segment today, but I thought it was really important to try and bring together some of these broader themes of the last couple of weeks, Dom.
Thanks, Francis. Good words there from the Gipper. I would note, though, we do get a lot of comments, people saying we shouldn't conflate the words of the administration with all Americans. Obviously, a statement of the blindingly obvious, but of course we know there's a huge fraternity of people in the US who do not agree with what's coming out of Washington. Anyway, Malcolm, delighted to have you back. Last met in July in Odessa, and I scandalously gave my queen away for... I still can't believe that. But you are the Telegraph's chess correspondent, which is interesting in its own right, but fascinating to hear the cultural import that Russia places on chess. But to start off today, if you could just give us a quick recap on why it's so important to Russia, but also FIDE, the governing body of world chess, is trying to get Russia back into world competition. Can you tell us why that is so controversial? Welcome back, Malcolm.
Thank you, Dom. Well, it's controversial because the International Olympic Committee announced sanctions on the participation of Russian teams quite shortly after the invasion. And virtually all the sports authorities of the world have gone along with that, and Russian teams have been barred from competition. And in some sports federations where they have significant influence, and in chess, the president of the World Chess Federation is a former Russian deputy prime minister, Arkady Dvorkovich, they're pushing to try and get their teams back. There hasn't been sanctions on individuals. Individual chess players have been able to play in tournaments under the FIDE flag, but the Russian flags and anthems and teams have been banned. And they're clearly pushing back on this now. There's a resolution coming up on Sunday at the online meeting of the governing body, and I'm doing my very best to stop it. I've written to Yvette Cooper to ask for her support. I've written to Lisa Nandy, who recently announced actually on the DCMS website a coalition of 34 countries plus the European Commission who come out against the participation of Russian teams in Paralympics.
Lisa Nandy, being the culture minister here in the UK, heads up the Department for Culture, Media and Sport.
Yes. And I have to say I'm still waiting for a reply to both those letters. I did manage to stop Russian teams getting back into competition last year at the FIDE Congress, but then our embassies wrote to chess federations and said, please don't do this, it's against the IOC regulations, it won't be good for the game of chess. So I'm actually asking the government to give me that support again and run this campaign over the next few days if we can. You asked about why chess is so important to the Russian state. Well, it goes back all the way to the revolution. Shortly after the revolution, Lenin wanted a way of bringing some form of popular culture to the people. And one of the things that he chose was chess. And chess was formally encouraged. It had huge state backing. It had funds. And centres of excellence were set up all over Russia, all over the Soviet Union. And Russia soon became the dominant force in world chess. And after the Second World War, there were a series of chess champions from the Soviet Union. And people must remember, of course, I'm sure there are lots of people listening to this podcast born after 1990, but, pre-1990, it wasn't just Russia as we know it now. It was all the countries of the Soviet Union. So Mikhail Tal, the world chess champion, was from Latvia. Tigran Petrosyan was from Armenia. They had nearly all of the world's top players and dominated the game for decades and decades. So it remains a part of Russian popular culture. It remains important to the Russian state. It's almost like I'd hark back to the great match in 1972 when Bobby Fischer, the lone American, defeated the Russian Boris Spassky. One of the great Russian chess players at the time, David Bronstein, said that it was a crippling blow. He said it felt like there was something wrong with our culture. It was almost if our system had been defeated. The communist system had been defeated by the American capitalist. And that feeling is still prevalent within Russian state structures. I mean, for example, Dmitry Peskov, who we've mentioned, views chess very, very important. When Karyakin, the Russian grandmaster, played for the world title against Magnus Carlsen in New York, Peskov was there. He turned up at the match. And you can tell how important it is to them, this matter of Russian status and Russian teams, because I've been personally attacked in the Russian press. So, I've made my debut in TASS, for example, the official Russian news agency. Match TV, which I suppose you could broadly compare to Sky Sports, has had 3 features vilifying me. I'm becoming famous there. So we can tell that chess is hugely important to them.
So if this vote doesn't go Russia's way on Sunday, will they just sort of dust themselves off and go, OK, fair enough, we'll try again another time? Or will this be seen as another significant blow? Are they expecting to win?
I think that they're expecting to win. I'm actually expecting them to win on this occasion. Although we won clearly last year at the Congress in Budapest, this Congress is being staged online. That is so easy to manipulate. And it's so much harder for us to get our views across. So when the Congress was face-to-face, I was able to lobby delegates, was able to speak to them. The then Minister of Strategic Procurement in Ukraine, Alexander Kamyshin, part of Zelensky's administration, came to Budapest to support the campaign. When it's online, I think our ability to even put our case will be limited, and I'm actually anticipating a defeat, in fact.
And why is it online? That seems to be the crucial thing here. Who pushed for that and who won that bit?
Well, in 2018, Arkady Dvorkovich was elected president of FIDE, at which point I said in one of my speeches, well, it's going to be the power vertical now, guys. Literally, new constitution, the guy can do whatever he wants. One of the things that we used to have in FIDE was term limits. Mr. Dvorkovich campaigned on term limits. That was one of the things that he campaigned on to get himself elected. They've scrapped term limits. So he'll be standing for a 3rd term. So he can have an online conference of delegates if he wants. It's absurd. There are nearly 200 delegates. It's ridiculous to have an online conference when you've got that many people voting and so much to be discussed. So I fear that the Russians will get their way, and I'm already planning really what the fight back is after we lose this vote. But in the meantime, it would be nice to get a little bit of support from the government, particularly as we've got so many chess players in the government, of course. 4 of them.
Well, and governments, of course, around Europe, and I'm sure there'll be many listeners who will be very interested in this story. Malcolm, it's great to have you back in. It's resurrecting memories for me of when I held out for longer than Dom in our chess game against you, and you are an international master, is that right?
I am.
My proudest chess achievement, I would say. But you were talking earlier on about the way that the Russian media is portraying you and see you as a hostile entity, and I know there were clips of you shown on there, as you say, equivalent of Sky Sports. Can you talk a little bit more about the things they say about you and about Ukraine, particularly in this context?
Sure. So I was condemned as a Russophobe, as someone who was basically out to make money. I think one of the things said that I went to Odessa business class. Now, anyone who's been to Odessa nowadays will know that you can't fly there because of the war. And in fact, I went in a taxi from Moldova, from Kishinev, with Andrew Mitchell, the MP, driven by a completely maniacal Moldovan taxi driver. We were both got out, felt we'd been fortunate to survive. So if that was the idea of business class, I shudder to think what economy might be.
At least you were spared the small talk that Dom was trying to make with our driver. That's all I'll say.
So there were a variety of insults. That I was in it just for money, that I was leading the campaign against Russia, and general sort of nonsense that I had some kind of hidden agenda. It's difficult for people in the West to fully appreciate just how propaganda works. It's literally just make anything up, frankly, because no one's going to contradict you. That's the thing in Russia, that the media, as I'm sure you've discussed many times, has just been so totally taken over. For the last 2 to 3 decades, people have been basically fed rubbish, nationalistic tripe. And so if you know that you're not going to get any pushback, if no one's going to come on and say, actually, are you sure about this, then you can literally say what you want.
And we spoke, I remember when we were in Odessa playing together, about Ukrainian chess, and we focused on that quite a lot. There's actually been a few successes recently of chess teams involving Ukrainian players, including one incredibly serving soldier on the front line. Could you just talk a little bit more about the health of Ukrainian chess at the moment?
Yeah, Ukrainian chess is still doing pretty well. Their team won the European Team Championships, staged in Batumi on the Black Sea coast in Georgia just a month or so ago. And that was a fantastic triumph for them. And Russia actually decided to leave the European Chess Union and go to Asia. It's an interesting sort of geopolitical shift there, that they don't see their future in Europe anymore. And so they are actually now part of the Asian Chess Federation. And in their absence, I have to say, things are a lot more relaxed. The head of the Russian Chess Federation was always obsessed with everyone cheating. It's a great joy not to have him present there. But the Ukrainians won, and Grandmaster Kovalenko was on the Ukrainian team and scored the best individual performance of the competition. And I was actually really honoured as a member of the board of the European Chess Union to actually award him his individual gold medal. And Ukraine won the team's competition, which was really, honestly, a popular victory.
And one last one from me before going back to Dom. Was talking about the Cold War earlier on, and you make reference to Bobby Fischer and Spassky and the great rivalries of that age. When the chess world looks back on that time, is it with a sense of nostalgia? This is when chess mattered on the global stage, or is it very much in the past and happily resigned there?
Everybody in the chess world those who remember it, look back on it with great nostalgia because it triggered an enormous chess boom.
Right.
And this was great for the game.
I will just kick off to say tomorrow. So what is it? What's tomorrow? Friday. Tomorrow is Friday, isn't it? Is it?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
It has been a mad few weeks.
So newsletters coming out tomorrow. I am going to attempt to answer questions from Arlene in Nova Scotia, Ryan in California, and Nicola in Switzerland. So please do keep your eyes out for that. Do please keep sending us your questions. We'll try and get through as many as we can on the pod and in the newsletter. But I'm looking forward to answering those tomorrow. Francis, what final thoughts you got?
Well, Putin's been back to his historical fibbing, and we spoke about some of them earlier on with Malcolm. Another one that he's been spouting this week is about the Donbass and how, quote, it's always been Russian. And as we've talked about on the podcast before, we've done deep dives on this subject, it simply isn't true. So for centuries, Donbass wasn't part of Russia at all. Up until, I think, the 1700s, it wasn't really even a settled place. There were Turkic nomadic tribes passing through, along with some Greeks. The whole area was known as the Wild Field because constant conflicts kept anyone from putting down roots there. And once the region did become safe, it was the Ukrainians who built the first lasting settlements, especially repopulating parts there that, as I say, had not been properly lived in prior to that point. Then there was the Industrial Revolution, which brought in major British and French investment, something that we've talked about in great detail in the past. There was the Welsh industrialist John Hughes. By the 1920s, the demographics were pretty clear. So statistics show that around 64% of the population were Ukrainian, about 26% were Russian. And even after the Holodomor, which of course was absolutely devastating for the Ukrainian population, and waves of Soviet-driven migration there, Ukrainians still made up 61% of the population in 1939. Russians have never been the majority there at any point in the last 1,000 years. So when the Kremlin pushes the idea that Donbass is historically Russian, it's counting on people not knowing the region's actual history. A history that is complex, multicultural, and rarely taught outside of Ukraine.
Thanks, Francis. Malcolm, delighted to see you again, as I said. As our guest, would you like to have the final thought? Where would you like to leave our listeners today?
I would. I think it's interesting to make comparisons with chess and geopolitics, because we touched on 1972 when it was a metaphor for the Cold War. Right now, chess is almost a metaphor for Putin's attempts to gather the old glories. In the same way that he'd like to see the old Soviet Union re-established and exert Russian influence and control over those territories, Russia's fallen off its perch in world chess. It's no longer the great power. The world champion is a Norwegian. India is the strongest country, or Uzbekistan, and there isn't a Russian in the top 10 of world chess anymore. And it feels to me that they're grasping, trying to recover past glories in the game of chess in the same way that they're trying to re-establish, if you like, hegemony over the old territories.
Trying to recover past glories. Who would have thought, eh? Thank you so much for joining us today. Lovely check jacket you're wearing there, mate.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today, folks. Ukraine the Latest is an original podcast from The Telegraph, created by David Nicholls. To support our work and stay on top of all of our Ukraine news, analysis and dispatches from the ground, please subscribe to The Telegraph. You can get 1 month free, then 2 months for just £1 at www.telegraph.co.uk/Ukraine the Latest. Deploying cutting-edge technology, we also release Ukrainian and Russian versions of this podcast. These translations retain our voices and delivery so that it can reach listeners in every region of Ukraine and those parts of Eastern Europe where Russian is still widely spoken. Links to those can be found in the podcast description to this episode. You can also now sign up to the new Ukraine the Latest weekly newsletter. Each week, Francis and I answer your questions, provide recommended reading, and give exclusive analysis and behind-the-scenes insights, plus maps of the front lines and diagrams of weapons, to complement our daily reporting. It's free for everyone, including non-subscribers. You can find the link to sign up in the descriptions for this episode. We regularly have a Ukraine live blog on our website where you can follow updates as they come in throughout the day, including insights from regular contributors to this podcast. We also do the same for other breaking international stories. If you appreciate our work, please consider following Ukraine the Latest on your preferred podcast app and leave us a review, as it really helps others find the show. Please also share it with those who may not be aware we exist. You can listen to this conversation live at 1 p.m. London time each weekday on X Spaces. Follow The Telegraph so that you don't miss it. You can also get in touch directly to ask questions or give comments by emailing ukrainepod@telegraph.co.uk. We continue to read every message. You can also contact us directly on X. You'll find our handles in the description for this episode. As ever, we're especially interested to hear where you're listening from around the world. Ukraine the Latest was today produced by Rachel Porter. Executive producers are Francis Dearnley, Louisa Wells and David Nicholls.
My name is David Nicholls. Thank you all for listening. Goodbye.